The Omega's cage. The attic room smelled of mildew and old wood, a scent so deeply embedded in the warped floorboards that Wren Datcher no longer noticed it most days. She noticed other things instead, the way the single window rattled when wind came from the north, how the ceiling leaked in 3 specific places when it rained, the exact creak of the 4th step on the staircase that warned her someone was coming. These were the details of survival, the small observations that kept a wolf alive in a place that would rather she disappear entirely. 3 years she had lived in this room. 3 years since Jackson Merrick stood before the entire Crescent Falls pack and spoke the words that should have killed her. "I reject you, Wren Thatcher." She remembered the way his hazel eyes had looked past her, rather than at her, as if she were already gone. Already nothing. She remembered the pain that followed, the kind that made her bones feel like they were splintering from the inside out, her wolf howling in agony as the bond severed with all the gentleness of a blade through flesh. Omegas were not meant to survive rejection. The books in the pack library, the ones she had read in those early days when she could still hope for something different, all said the same thing. The lowest rank, the weakest wolves, they died when their mates cast them aside. Their wolves simply gave up, unable to bear the severing of something so fundamental. But Wren had not died. She had wanted to, had spent weeks in a fever that should have taken her, but her body had clung to life with a stubbornness that felt more like curse than gift. Now she existed in the narrow space between living and surviving, a servant in the pack house of the very wolves who had watched her rejection and done nothing. The Crescent Falls pack was not cruel in the obvious ways. They did not beat her or starve her outright. Their cruelty was softer, more insidious. The way they looked through her as if she were invisible. The scraps of food left for her only after everyone else had eaten. The attic room with its leaking ceiling and single threadbare blanket. Alpha Garrett Merrick, Jackson's father, had told her she owed a debt for the care they provided during her recovery, and until that debt was paid, she would work. 3 years later, the debt never seemed to shrink. Wren pushed herself up from the thin mattress on the floor, her body protesting the movement. Dawn had not yet broken, but her day began in darkness, the way it always did. She dressed quickly in the cold, pulling on clothes that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. Her reflection in the small, cracked mirror showed a woman of 23 who looked older, copper-red hair tangled and dull, gray-green eyes that seemed colorless in the dim light, a thin white scar running from her left temple to her jawline, a gift from a fall during those fever weeks when no one had cared enough to catch her. The pack house was silent as she descended the stairs, careful to skip the 4th step. Her tasks were always the same: scrub the floors of the main hall before the pack woke, prepare breakfast in the kitchen under the sharp supervision of the head cook, who despised her for reasons Wren had stopped trying to understand, serve the meals she was not allowed to eat from, clean the dishes, scrub the floors again. Repeat until night fell and she could retreat to her attic cage. Her wolf had been silent since the rejection, a presence so faint Wren sometimes wondered if she had imagined ever having one at all. She had not been able to shift in 3 years, her body refusing the transformation, as if that part of her had died even though the rest survived. The pack healers said it was normal, that rejection damaged wolves in ways that could not always be repaired. Wren believed them because believing otherwise hurt too much. As she knelt on the cold stone floor, scrubbing at a stain that had been there longer than she had, Wren let her mind drift to the forbidden place it always went when she was alone. She did not know what it would look like anymore, could not imagine a life beyond these walls, but the wanting remained, a small ember that refused to be extinguished, no matter how much water the world poured on it. Sometimes she thought about the forest she could see from her window, the dense trees that stretched for miles beyond the packlands. She had not been allowed to enter those woods since the rejection. Omegas without wolves were too vulnerable, they said, too weak to defend themselves if something found them. The irony was not lost on her. They kept her trapped to protect her from dangers outside, while ignoring the danger of a life lived in a cage. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts, and she kept her eyes down as pack members began to descend for breakfast. She had learned not to make eye contact, not to draw attention, not to give anyone a reason to remember she existed. Invisibility was its own kind of armor. But today, invisibility shattered. Alpha Garrett entered the dining hall with an expression that made the air feel heavier, his authority filling the space the way smoke filled a closed room. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with the kind of presence that demanded obedience without. Behind him walked his son, Jackson, who had been carefully avoiding Wren's existence for 3 years with an expertise that felt intentional. Garrett's voice boomed across the hall, silencing the low conversations. "The Alpha King will arrive in 3 days." Wren's hands stilled on the floor, her heart suddenly too loud in her chest. Declan Ferrister and his delegation, including Beta Finn Ferrister, will conduct an inspection of our territory, Garrett continued, his tone carrying an edge of something Wren could not quite name. Worry, perhaps, or fear disguised as formality. Every inch of this pack house will be immaculate. Every member will show proper respect. We will not give the king any reason to question our loyalty or competence. The king. Wren had heard stories, the kind whispered in kitchens and servant quarters. Declan Ferrister, who had become Alpha King at 19 after his parents were assassinated, who ruled the North American werewolf territories with an iron hand and eyes that glowed like molten gold. They said he was dying now, poisoned by silver in an attack no one could trace, his body failing despite every healer's efforts. They said he was searching for something, some rare herb or magic that might save him, though most believed he was already a dead man walking. Wren did not know why a dying king would come to Crescent Falls, a small and unremarkable pack on the edge of his territories. She did not know why her hands were shaking as she returned to scrubbing the floor. She only knew that in 3 days, something would change. And change, in her experience, was rarely kind to wolves like her. The fateful encounter. The guest wing of the Crescent Falls pack house had not been used in years, and it showed. Wren spent 2 days scrubbing floors that had accumulated layers of dust thick enough to write in, washing windows that barely remembered what sunlight looked like, beating carpets until her arms ached and her lungs burned from the clouds of debris. The other servants avoided this wing, claimed they had more important tasks elsewhere, which meant Wren worked alone in the silence, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the occasional creak of old wood settling. She did not mind the solitude. Solitude meant no one watching her with contempt, no one reminding her with their eyes that she was less than nothing. On the 3rd night, the night before the king's arrival, Alpha Garrett sent her back to finish the last room, the largest suite at the end of the hall. The sun had already set, darkness pressing against the windows like something alive, and Wren worked by lamplight, her shadow stretching long and distorted across walls that had not seen care in far too long. She was on her knees, scrubbing the hardwood floor near the window, when she heard it, a sound from outside, low and pained, almost swallowed by the wind. Wren froze, her hands stilling on the brush. It came again, clearer this time, a sound that was neither animal nor human, but something caught between. Every instinct told her to ignore it, to finish her work and return to her attic room and forget she had heard anything at all. Investigating meant leaving the pack house without permission, meant going into the forest she was forbidden to enter, meant risking punishment if she was discovered. But the sound came again, and this time it carried a note of such agony that Wren's hands moved before her mind could stop them. She left through the servants' entrance, the one that did not have a guard because who would bother watching a door used only by omegas and other forgotten things? The forest behind the pack house was dense and dark. trees crowding so close together their branches wove into a canopy that blocked what little moonlight existed. Ren had no wolf to guide her, no enhanced senses to pierce the darkness, but she followed the sound like a thread pulling her forward, her human eyes adjusting slowly to the shadows. She found him in a small clearing, collapsed against a tree with his body half shifted in a way that looked painful, wrong. Even in the darkness, even in his current state, he was the largest man Ren had ever seen. Broad shoulders, long limbs, a frame that spoke of power even as that power clearly failed him. His skin was slicked with sweat, his breathing labored, and when he shifted slightly, she saw the black veins spreading up his arms like ink poisoning his blood. Silver poisoning. She recognized it from the books she had read, though she had never seen it in person. Fatal, always. The silver worked its way through the bloodstream slowly, shutting down organs, turning the body against itself until there was nothing left but pain and death. Ren should have run, should have called for help, for the pack healers, for anyone, but her useless self. But she found herself moving closer instead, her feet carrying her forward until she knelt beside him, and in the moment before she touched him, before everything changed, she saw his eyes open. Amber, gold, glowing even in his agony, fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then her fingers touched his skin, just her hand on his arm, to check if he was conscious, and the world detonated. It felt like lightning striking her directly, like every nerve in her body ignited at once, like something dormant and buried deep suddenly exploded into awareness. A golden thread snapped taut between them, visible for just a moment, a connection so fundamental that Ren could not understand how she had existed without feeling it before. Her wolf, silent for 3 years, surged to the surface with a force that made her gasp, not shifting, but present, awake, howling with recognition. Mate! No, impossible. She had already had a mate, had already been rejected, had already survived what should have killed her. Wolves did not get second chances. The bond did not make mistakes and then correct them. This could not be happening. But the man's eyes were glowing brighter now, pure molten gold, his body going rigid as his wolf responded to what hers already knew. His hand shot out faster than she could track, gripping her wrist with strength that should have been impossible for someone so poisoned, and the word that came from his throat was barely human. No. It was a roar and a denial and a plea all at once. His chest heaved, muscles straining as if he were fighting something inside himself, and Ren realized with a clarity that felt like ice water that he was fighting the bond, fighting his own wolf, fighting the pull that was trying to drag him toward her. "This can't happen," he growled, and his voice was beautiful and terrible, authority and desperation woven together. "I don't have time to die slowly watching you leave too." Ren did not understand, could not process words when her entire body was screaming at her to move closer, to touch him more, to complete something that felt vital and inevitable. But fear was stronger than instinct, fear born from experience, from knowing that bonds could be broken, and that she was the kind of wolf who got rejected. "You're dying," she whispered, because that much was obvious. The silver poisoning so advanced she did not know how he was still conscious. "I know." His grip on her wrist loosened, but he did not let go, as if he could not quite force himself to break the contact completely. "You shouldn't be here." But she was here, and the bond was real, and some buried part of Ren that still remembered how to hope was whispering that maybe, impossibly, this was the freedom she had dreamed of. She pulled her wrist free, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to think, needed space between them to hear anything other than the mate bond screaming in her blood. She sat back on her heels, studying him in the darkness. Black hair streaked with silver at the temples, angular features carved with pain, a body that was shutting down, and a will that refused to let it. "You're the Alpha King," Ren said. just because she needed to say something, needed words to anchor her. Declan. He closed his eyes, his breathing still labored. My name is Declan. Ren. Her own name felt strange in her mouth, like she had not said it in years. Most people did not bother asking. A spasm of pain crossed his features, his body convulsing, and Ren moved without thinking, her hands reaching for him again. The moment she touched him, that golden thread flared bright, and she felt something flow between them, from her into him, something warm and soothing that eased the worst of his agony, even though she did not understand what she was doing. Declan's eyes snapped open, fixed on her with an expression between wonder and horror. What are you? Ren shook her head. She did not know. She had never been anything special, had always been told she was the weakest kind of wolf. But her hands were glowing faintly now, silver-white light emanating from her palms where they pressed against his poisoned skin, and the black veins were receding, just slightly, just enough. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what's happening. Declan reached up, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his size and power, his thumb tracing the scar on her cheek. You're saving me, he said, and his voice carried a weight of grief that Ren did not understand. And I can't let you. Before she could ask what he meant, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed completely, unconscious, the silver poisoning dragging him under despite her strange glowing hands. Ren knelt there in the dark forest, holding a dying king who was somehow her mate, and made a choice that would change everything. She would get help, even if it meant revealing she had gone somewhere forbidden, even if it meant punishment, because the bond was screaming that he mattered more than her safety ever could. Revelations and secrets. Ren ran through the darkness, her lungs burning, her mind spinning with panic and purpose. She found Finn Ferrister patrolling the perimeter of the pack house, his sandy hair catching the lamplight as he turned at the sound of her approach. He was smaller than his brother, but still tall, still imposing, with warm brown eyes that widened when he saw her expression. The king, Ren gasped, her words tumbling over themselves. He's in the forest, he's collapsed, the silver poisoning, he needs help now. Finn did not waste time with questions. He followed her through the trees at a speed that left her struggling to keep pace. And when they reached the clearing, he dropped to his knees beside Declan with a curse that was half prayer. Other wolves appeared. Ren, moments later, drawn by Finn's howl, and suddenly the clearing was full of movement, warriors lifting Declan's unconscious form, pack healers rushing forward with bags of supplies, Alpha Garrett's voice cutting through the chaos with demands for explanations. They brought him to the pack house, to the very suite Ren had spent the evening cleaning, and she was pushed aside in the commotion, forgotten as more important wolves took over. She should have returned to her attic room, should have disappeared before anyone remembered to ask why she had been in the forbidden forest. But her feet would not move, her body refusing to leave, while her mate, impossible as that word felt, lay dying one floor below. She waited in the hallway outside the suite, pressed against the wall like a shadow, and watched through the partially open door as pack healers worked. She saw Finn pacing, his expression carved with worry. She saw Alpha Garrett speaking in low, urgent tones with his advisors. And then she saw a woman arrive, tall and elegant, with sleek blonde hair and ice blue eyes that swept the room with the confidence of someone who owned everything she surveyed. Luna Vivian Cross. Ren recognized her from Pat Gossip, the Alpha King's intended, his political match, the woman who would become queen when they formalized their bond. Vivian moved Declan's bedside with practiced grace, her hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture that looked tender but felt, to Ren watching from the hallway, like ownership. When Vivian's eyes lifted and caught Ren's through the doorway, the look that passed between them was sharp enough to cut. Assessment, dismissal, a warning. Hours passed. Dawn came. Ren remained in the hallway, ignored by wolves moving past her, until finally an elderly woman with gray hair and startling violet eyes emerged from the suite and fixed Ren with a stare that felt like it could see through skin to whatever lay beneath. "You touched him," the woman said. It was not a question. "You're the one who slowed the poison." Ren nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Come with me." The woman, who introduced herself as Rhiannon, the royal healer, led Ren to a smaller room and closed the door behind them. What followed was an examination that felt invasive and illuminating in equal measure. Rhiannon's hands glowing with diagnostic magic, her violet eyes narrowing as she studied something Ren could not see. "Impossible," Rhiannon murmured. Then, louder, "Where are your parents, child?" "Dead." The word came automatically. "They died when I was 10. A fire." "A fire?" Rhiannon's expression suggested she did not believe in coincidences. "And your bloodline? What do you know of your family?" "Nothing. I was raised by the pack after they died. I'm Omega. I was always told I was just nothing special." Even as Ren said it, she felt the lie in it, the weight of something hidden. Rhiannon was silent for a long moment, her magic still flowing around Ren like water. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of something ancient and significant. "You are not just Omega. You are Lunar Healer, a bloodline that was supposed to be extinct. Your ancestors were wolves who could purify poison, could cleanse dark magic, could heal wounds that should have been fatal. They were eliminated, hunted down, and killed because that kind of power makes you dangerous to those who work in shadows." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ren tried to process them, tried to fit this impossible information into everything she knew about herself. Worthless, broken, rejected. "That can't be right. I can't even shift. I haven't been able to since my mate rejected me 3 years ago." Rejected? Rhiannon's eyes sharpened. An Omega surviving rejection is rare enough, but a lunar healer? The rejection should have been impossible to complete. Unless, she paused, her expression darkening, unless someone wanted your power suppressed, wanted you to believe you were nothing, so you would never learn what you could do. Before Ren could respond, the door opened and Finn entered, his expression grim. "Rhiannon, Declan is asking for the girl, and Vivian is demanding to know what's happening." She felt the mate bond snap. Of course she did. Everyone in that room probably felt it. The golden thread connecting Ren to the dying king, visible to any wolf with enough power to sense such things. They returned to the suite together, and this time Ren was not left in the hallway. Declan was awake, propped against pillows, his skin still too pale and the black veins still visible but receding. His amber eyes found her immediately, tracked her as she entered, and the bond pulled taut between them like a physical thing. Vivian stood on the opposite side of the bed, her posture perfect, her expression controlled. "This Omega," she said, not bothering to look at Ren, "cannot possibly be your mate. It's clearly a mistake, perhaps a side effect of the poison affecting your senses." "It's not a mistake." Declan's voice was rough but firm. "I felt it, she felt it. Denying it won't change what is." "An Omega mate will destroy your authority," Vivian continued, as if he had not spoken. "The Pax will see it as weakness. You need strength beside you, not some broken wolf who cannot even shift." Each word landed like a blow because they were true, or at least had been true for 3 years. Ren wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and vanish, but Declan's eyes held her in place. "She's not broken," Rhiannon interjected. "She's Lunar Healer, the last of a bloodline that was systematically destroyed. Someone wanted her power suppressed, wanted her to believe she was worthless." "How convenient." Vivian's tone was light, almost amused. "A miraculous discovery right when the king is dying, and a mate bond appears. Perhaps someone is manipulating events, creating false bonds to position themselves advantageously." "The bond is real." Finn stepped forward, his loyalty to his brother clear in every line of his body. "I felt it snap. Everyone in this room felt it. You can't fake that kind of magic." Vivian's expression flickered, just for a moment, something cold and calculating passing behind her eyes before the mask of concerned fiancé returned. "Then we must consider what this means politically." The king cannot complete a bond with an Omega while negotiations with 6 packs depend on our marriage alliance. The timing is suspect. I suggest we table this discussion until Declan is fully recovered and can think clearly. I'm thinking clearly enough. Declan's gaze had not left Ren, and in his eyes she saw conflict, want and fear, hope and resignation. Ren will stay here, under King's protection. Anyone who harms her commits treason. She'll serve as my personal healer until we understand what's happening. It was not acceptance of the bond, but it was not rejection either. It was survival, politics, a middle ground that satisfied no one. Vivian smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Of course, whatever the king commands. As the room emptied, Ren remained, and Declan finally spoke the words that had been building since the moment they touched. The bond could save my life. Rhiannon says a fully realized mate bond with a lunar healer might purify the poison completely, but completing it puts a target on you, and I have enemies I haven't even identified yet. Someone poisoned me 2 years ago with magic that shouldn't exist. They're still out there. So you'll just die? Ren's voice was steadier than she felt. I've been dying for 2 years. I'm used to it. His attempt at humor fell flat. But I won't watch you die because of me. Forced adaptation. The first week in Ironhold passed in a blur of impossibilities made mundane through repetition. Ren had been relocated to the royal territory with a speed that left her breathless, pulled from Crescent Falls before she could even retrieve what few possessions she owned. Not that there here had been much worth retrieving. Ironhold was vast in a way that made her former pack lands look like a garden. 200 square miles of forest and mountains surrounding a central compound that was part fortress, part palace, all stone and strength that had stood for centuries. They gave her quarters in the king's residence, a room 3 times the size of her attic cage, with a window that overlooked actual gardens instead of forbidden forests. The bed had blankets that were new and thick, the floor did not leak when it rained, and no one looked at her like she was something to be scraped off their shoes. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to realize the mistake and send her back to where broken Omegas belonged. Her official role was personal healer to the king, which meant she spent her days in Declan's presence, preparing poultices from herbs Rhiannon taught her to identify, monitoring the silver poisoning that continued its slow march toward his heart despite her efforts, learning to access a power she had not known existed until a week ago. The work was methodical, careful, and maintained a distance between them that felt safer than the alternative. Declan was formal during these sessions, addressing her by name but keeping conversations strictly to medical necessity. He sat or stood as directed, allowed her to check his pulse and examine the black veins spreading beneath his skin, and never touched her beyond what was required. It was professional, appropriate, and it made Ren's wolf, newly awakened after 3 years of silence, pace restlessly inside her chest with frustration. On the 3rd day, as Ren ground herbs into paste while Declan reviewed territorial reports at his desk, she finally broke the silence that had become their routine. "Why did you come to Crescent Falls? There are packs closer to Ironhold, packs with better resources." Declan's pen stilled on the parchment. "There's a plant that grows in that region, moon thistle, that Rhiannon believed might slow the poison. It didn't work, obviously, but it was worth investigating." He paused, then added, "I was running out of options and time. 6 weeks ago, the deterioration accelerated. I've been searching for anything that might buy me a few more months." 6 weeks ago. The same time Ren had started having dreams of forests she did not recognize, of running on 4 legs through moonlight, of a pull towards something she could not name. She had dismissed them as wishful thinking, her broken wolf's desperate fantasy. Now she wondered if it had been the bond, reaching for its other half before either of them knew to look. "Do you regret it?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Finding me, I mean. The bond complicates everything." Declan set down his pen and finally looked at her directly, his amber eyes tired but honest. I regret that you're in danger because of what I am. I regret that I can't give you a choice about any of this. But regret finding you? He shook his head slowly. No. Even knowing it makes everything harder? No. It was the most personal thing he had said to her since the forest, and Wren did not know what to do with the way it made her chest feel tight and warm simultaneously. The fourth night changed things. Wren had been given quarters connected to Declan's suite through a shared sitting room, close enough to respond if the poison crisis escalated, but separate enough to maintain propriety. She woke to the sound of something breaking, glass shattering, and ran through the connecting door without thinking to find Declan collapsed beside his bed, his body racked with tremors as the poison surged. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands finding his skin, and felt the heat of fever burning through him. His eyes were open but unfocused, lost somewhere in the space between consciousness and delirium, and the words spilling from his lips were fragments of nightmares made verbal. Not again. Can't lose another. Everyone leaves. Everyone dies. Father went mad when mother. Can't become that. Can't. Won't. Wren pressed her glowing palms to his chest, feeling the poison concentrated around his heart, pulsing with each beat like a second entity trying to stop the first. She pushed her power into him, that strange silver-white light that she still did not fully understand, and felt the poison retreat slightly, enough for the tremors to ease. She stayed there through the night, her hands on him, her power flowing in steady waves, while Declan murmured pieces of a history she had not known. Parents assassinated when he was 19, forced to take the crown before he understood what it meant to rule, his father's descent into madness after his mate died, the fear that ran deeper than the poison that he would repeat that pattern. By dawn, the crisis had passed, and Declan woke to find her still kneeling beside his bed, exhausted and glowing faintly. He stared at her for a long moment, memory returning behind his eyes, and she waited for him to be embarrassed or angry that she had witnessed his vulnerability. Instead, he reached up and tucked a strand of copper hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes, I did. It was the truth. The bond would not have let her leave him suffering. But more than that, she had not wanted to. Something shifted between them after that night. Declan still maintained distance during the day, but he started bringing her breakfast himself in the mornings, sitting with her while she ate instead of working through meals. He asked questions about her life before, and though many of her answers were painful, the fact that he asked, that he cared to know, mattered. On the sixth day, despite Finn's protests that he was too weak, Declan insisted on showing Wren the royal territory. They walked through forests that felt ancient, past a waterfall that crashed into a pool so clear Wren could see straight to the bottom, and for the first time since her rejection, she felt something close to peace. "What does it feel like?" Wren asked as they sat on smooth rocks near the water's edge. "To go where you wish, to choose your path." Declan was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the waterfall. "I've been king since I was 19. 12 years of every decision made for political necessity, every action weighed against territorial stability, every relationship evaluated for strategic benefit. I don't remember what choice feels like either, Wren. I exist in a different cage than you did, but it's a cage nonetheless." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw past the power and authority to something that matched what she carried: loneliness, duty without desire, survival without living. "We're quite a pair," she said softly, "the broken Omega and the dying king." "You're not broken." His hand found hers on the rock between them, his fingers threading through hers, and the bond sang at the contact. "You survived what should have killed you. You're still standing after 3 years of treatment that would have destroyed most wolves. That's not broken, Wren. That's steel wrapped in skin." She wanted to kiss him, wanted to close the distance between them and feel if his lips were as warm as his hands, if the bond would flare brighter with that contact. She leaned forward slightly, saw his pupils dilate as he realized her intent, watched him start to mirror the movement. "There you are." Vivian's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She stood at the edge of the clearing in a dress too fine for hiking, her expression pleasant and her eyes calculating. "The council needs you urgently, my king. Another attack on the western border." The moment shattered. Declan pulled his hand from Ren's, and the loss of contact felt physical. He stood, his king mask sliding back into place, and followed Vivian back toward the compound without looking back. Ren sat alone by the waterfall and tried not to feel like she had just lost something she had never quite been allowed to have. Conspiracy revealed. 2 weeks had passed since Ren arrived at Ironhold, and Declan's condition was deteriorating faster despite her nightly healing sessions. The silver poison was not behaving like natural contamination. Rhiannon had said as much on the 3rd day, but it took until now, until the elderly healer performed a complex diagnostic spell that left her exhausted and grim-faced, for them to understand why. "It's bound with dark magic," Rhiannon announced to the small group assembled in Declan's private study. The king himself, Finn, Ren, and notably absent Vivian, who had been conveniently called away to manage some distant pack dispute. Someone wove a spell into the silver itself, designed to prevent healing, to resist purification, to ensure death was slow but inevitable. This was not a simple assassination attempt. This was torture, masked as poison. Ren felt the words settle like ice in her stomach. She had been spending her nights in the royal archives with Rhiannon's permission, searching through records that dated back centuries, looking for information about lunar healers, and finding instead a trail of questions that led somewhere dark. Her parents, whose names she barely remembered, had been more than simple pack members. They had been royal healers, employed by Declan's father, trusted with the health of the royal family itself. And they had died investigating dark magic use in the court 13 years ago. The records called it an accident, a tragic fire, but the timing felt wrong, the explanations too convenient. "My parents," Ren said quietly, and 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. "They worked here, for your father, King Cyrus. They died when I was 10, and the records say it was a fire, but they were investigating something before they died. Someone using blood magic to manipulate pack bonds." Finn moved to the bookshelves, pulling down a leather journal that looked ancient. "Father kept private records separate from official archives. If your parents found something, he might have documented it." He flipped through pages, his expression darkening as he read. Here, an entry from 13 years ago. "Healers Thatcher have discovered evidence of bond manipulation among lower-ranked wolves. Several forced rejections that should not have been possible. Suspect dark magic influence, but cannot identify source. They request time to investigate further before bringing accusations." "They never got that time," Rhiannon said softly. "They died 2 weeks after that entry." The room fell silent as the implications crystallized. Someone had killed Ren's parents. Parents to hide their use of dark magic. That same someone, or their allies, had likely orchestrated the assassination of Declan's parents a year later when King Cyrus continued the investigation. And 2 years ago, when Declan started examining corruption in his territories, that same someone had poisoned him with magic designed to kill slowly. Ren's hands were shaking, memories were surfacing, fragments she had buried or forgotten. Her mother's face, urgent and frightened, hiding her in a closet and whispering, "Don't let them know what you can do." The smell of smoke, the sound of her mother screaming, and a figure watching from the tree line as the house burned, tall and blonde and untouched by the flames. "I saw someone," Ren whispered, "the night my parents died. I was 10 and my memories are fragmented, but there was someone watching, a woman, blonde hair." Even as she said it, she knew how it sounded, How unreliable a traumatized child's memory could be. But Finn had gone very still, his eyes on the journal in his hands. Father wrote about a young council member who opposed the investigation, called her ambitious, dangerous, from a family with a history of practicing forbidden magic, the Cross family. The name hung in the air like a curse. Vivian Cross, who had positioned herself as Declan's intended, who had been a trusted advisor for years, who had convenient explanations for everything and was never quite where she should be when questions arose. "It's circumstantial," Declan said, but his voice carried no conviction. "We can't accuse a Luna candidate of murder and dark magic without proof." "Then we find proof," Rhiannon stood, her violet eyes fierce. "I can trace the magical signature of the poison, compare it to residual magic in locations Vivian frequents. If she's the source, the signatures will match." The spell took hours. Ren watched as Rhiannon worked, drawing complex symbols in the air with her glowing fingers, chanting in a language that predated modern pack speech. When the magic finally coalesced, it formed a shimmering thread that led from Declan's poisoned blood, out through the study door, down corridors, directly to Vivian's private quarters. They found the evidence in a locked cabinet hidden behind a false wall, vials of silver compound mixed with something darker, journals detailing years of manipulation and murder, and a ledger listing names. Ren's parents were there, Declan's parents, dozens of other wolves who had died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. But Vivian herself was not there, and that should have been the first warning. Declan ordered her arrest immediately, sending hard guards to find her. But Ren felt something twist in her gut, a premonition born from too many years of surviving by reading danger in the air. She left the study while the others strategized, following an instinct she did not fully understand, and found Jackson Merrick standing in the corridor outside her quarters. He looked different than he had 3 years ago, thinner, haunted, with eyes that could not quite meet hers. "Ren," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried to fight it, tried to stop myself, but the compulsion was too strong." Compulsion? Ren took a step back, her heart racing. 3 years ago, Vivian came to Crescent Falls. She was building a network, identifying threats to her plans. She saw you, recognized what you were somehow, and she compelled me to reject you, used magic to force the words from my mouth because she needed your power suppressed, needed you broken and hidden where you'd never realize what you could do. Tears streaked down his face. "I've been aware this whole time, watching you suffer, unable to tell anyone, unable to fight the magic binding me. And now she's activated the final part of her plan." What plan? But even as Ren asked, she heard the sound of footsteps, too many footsteps, and turned to see Vivian emerging from a side passage with 6 wolves at her back, all with the glazed eyes of magical compulsion. "The plan, where I remove all obstacles at once," Vivian said pleasantly. She looked at Ren with something like regret. "You should have stayed suppressed, little healer. Your parents were so careful to hide you, and you were so perfectly broken after the rejection. But then he had to go looking for moon thistle in your territory, and the bond found you anyway. Some things even I can't control." Silver flashed in the dim light. Ren felt something wrap around her throat, cold and constricting, a collar, just like the ones described in her mother's research notes, designed to suppress power and enforce obedience. "Sleep now," Vivian commanded, and the world went dark. When wolves break. Ren woke to the smell of silver and magic, a combination that made her stomach turn and her head pound with nauseating rhythm. The collar around her throat was cold, so cold it burned, and when she tried to reach for her wolf, tried to access the healing power that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks, she found nothing but empty silence. Suppressed, bound, caged again, but this time the cage was metal and magic wrapped around her neck. The room she occupied was concrete and sterile, part of some abandoned facility that still had the bones of modern construction, but had been left to decay at the edges. Through the single window set high in the wall, she could see trees, which meant she was still somewhere in Ironhold's vast territory. But the remoteness suggested borderlands, places where screams would not carry to anyone who cared to hear them. Vivian visited on the first day, her appearance immaculate despite the circumstances, as if abducting the king's mate was simply another item on her schedule to be handled with efficiency and grace. "The new moon is in 3 days," she explained conversationally, as if discussing weather rather than murder. "I'll perform the ritual then, drain your lunar healer abilities, and use them to sustain my own life indefinitely. Your bloodline dies with you, which is poetic, really. I killed your parents for the same knowledge, and now I get to complete what we started 13 years ago." "Declan will find me," Ren said, her voice hoarse from the collar's pressure. "Declan is dying." Vivian's smile was gentle, pitying. "The separation from a newly formed mate bond is catastrophic for alphas, especially ones already weakened by poison. I've seen it before. The way the wolf takes over when it senses its mate in danger. The way reason disappears and only instinct remains. He's probably already gone feral, destroying everything around him, unable to distinguish friend from enemy. By the time he dies from the combination of poison and bond separation, you'll already be gone. It's almost merciful, really. Neither of you will have to live without the other." She left, and Ren was alone with the implications. Declan, losing himself to the beast, his careful control shattered by the bond's demands. She had seen alphas go feral in Crescent Falls, had watched from hidden corners as they were put down like rabid animals when the madness could not be reversed. The thought of Declan meeting that end, his last moments consumed by violence and confusion, made something in her chest crack. Jackson came on the second night, slipping into her cell with food he could barely force through the compulsion magic that still held him. His hands shook as he passed the tray through the bars, and Ren could see the struggle written across his face, the way he fought against invisible chains to perform even this small kindness. "I can't free you," he said, his voice breaking. "The compulsion won't let me touch the lock. But I brought what I could, some herbs that might help with the pain from the collar." Ren took the tray, saw the moon thistle hidden beneath the bread, the same plant Declan had come to Crescent Falls searching for. It would not cure her, would not break the collar, but it might give her strength to endure what came next. "Tell me about the compulsion," Ren said, because she needed to understand, needed to know if Jackson had truly been a victim or if some part of him had chosen the cruelty. "When you rejected me, were you aware? Did you know what you were doing?" Jackson sank to the floor outside the bars, his head in his hands. "I knew. I felt the magic forcing my mouth to form the words, felt my wolf screaming to stop, but I couldn't. I had to watch myself destroy you and couldn't even apologize after because the compulsion forbid acknowledgement. 3 years of seeing you in that attic, being treated like refuse, and all I could do was avoid you because being near you and being unable to help was torture." "I don't forgive you," Ren said quietly, "but I understand. You were a victim too, just a different kind." Back at Ironhold, Declan was indeed breaking. Finn would describe it later, in the aftermath, as watching his brother burn from the inside out, as if the mate bond separation was acid in his veins, and the poison was fuel feeding the fire. The first day, Declan had tried to maintain control, had issued orders and organized search parties, and functioned as a king should. But by nightfall, when Ren still had not been found, his wolf had surged to the surface with a force that shattered his human restraint. The transformation was violent. Bones broke and reformed, muscles tore and regrew, and Declan's human consciousness was shoved aside as the wolf took complete control. In wolf form, he was massive, black fur streaked with silver, amber eyes glowing with madness and single-minded purpose. Find mate, protect mate, destroy anything that stood in the way. He destroyed 3 rooms in the royal residence before Finn and 20 warriors managed to contain him. And even contained, he was a force of nature, barely leashed, snarling and clawing at anything that came close. Rhiannon tried sedation spells, but the wolf burned through them like they were mist. The bond was driving him, the primal need to reach Ren overriding every other consideration, including his own safety. If we don't find her soon, the wolf will kill him, Rhiannon told Finn as they watched Declan pace his reinforced containment, a cage built to hold the most dangerous of their kind. The combination of poison, bond separation, and feral state, his heart won't survive it. 3 days, maybe 4, before his body simply shuts down. On the second night of her captivity, Ren made a decision born from desperation and clarity in equal measure. She had survived rejection by becoming nothing, by making herself so small and invisible that she could survive this too. She could survive this too, could retreat into that empty space inside herself and endure whatever Vivian did to her. But Declan could not survive her loss. The bond was killing him, and she was the only cure. She used the moon thistle Jackson had brought, ground it between her fingers until it released its bitter oils, and drew symbols on the concrete floor with her own blood from a dozen small cuts on her palms. She did not know what she was doing, had no training in this kind of magic, but instinct guided her hands and desperation fueled her power. Her mother's voice echoed in fractured memories. The bond is a bridge, child, and bridges carry traffic both ways. Ren reached through the bond, past the collar's suppression, past the distance between them, and called to him with everything she had left. She felt him answer immediately, felt the feral wolf latch onto her signal like a lifeline, felt the direction lock into place in his consciousness. She poured her remaining strength into the call, knowing it might drain her life force completely, but unable to care because he needed to find her and she needed him to survive. Even if she did not. At Ironhold, the change was instantaneous. Declan's wolf stopped pacing, stopped snarling, and turned, toward the western border with such focus that the air seemed to still around him. Then he moved, crashing through the reinforced door like it was paper, and ran. Finn and the warriors followed, but they could not match his speed, could not track the way he moved through the forest like violence given form. Declan covered 50 miles in under 2 hours, following the bond's thread through wilderness that would have taken others days to navigate, and nothing that tried to stop him survived the attempt. In her cell, Ren felt him getting closer, felt the bond burning brighter as distance decreased, and she allowed herself one moment of hope before Vivian appeared in the doorway with silver chains and fury written across her perfect features. "You called him here. The ritual moon isn't optimal, but I'll take what power you have left before he arrives." Vivian's smile was sharp. The last thing he'll know before dying is that his mate is gone. The Omega's reckoning. The building shook as if an earthquake struck, concrete walls vibrating with the force of impact that came from outside. Then came the wolf. He crashed through the reinforced exterior wall like it was constructed of paper rather than steel and stone, massive and silver-streaked black, eyes glowing not with reason, but with pure, primal fury. The berserker wolf was larger than any natural animal had right to be. Power made flesh, and the sound that ripped from his throat was not a howl, but something deeper, older, a declaration of violence that made even Vivian's compelled guards hesitate. They did not hesitate long enough. 12 trained warriors stood between the wolf and Ren's cell, and what followed was not a fight, but a slaughter, described through impact rather than detail. Bodies hitting walls with sickening cracks, the wet sound of claws finding flesh, screams cut short as the wolf moved through them like a force of nature that could not be reasoned with or stopped. He was unstoppable, driven by instinct that recognized only 2 categories, mate and obstacle, and obstacles were removed with ruthless efficiency. Vivian watched the carnage with calculated eyes, and even as her guards fell, she continued the ritual she had begun. Ren was strapped to a metal table at the room's center, silver chains crossing her body, the suppression collar at her throat burning cold. Vivian's hands glowed with dark magic, tendrils of shadow reaching toward Ren like grasping fingers, and where they touched, Ren felt her life force begin to drain, pulled out through her skin in a sensation that was drowning in reverse. The wolf reached the ritual room door just as Finn and 20 more warriors arrived at the facility. Vivian smiled, raising one hand toward the doorway, and silver chains erupted from the walls, wrapping around the massive black wolf with precision that spoke of preparation. The chains were spelled, reinforced, designed to hold even an alpha king, and they tightened with each struggle, biting into fur and flesh until blood ran black in the dim light. Declan's wolf howled, the sound filled with such rage and pain that it seemed to shake reality itself. But the chains held. Vivian's magic continued pulling at Ren's essence, the ritual circle beneath the table glowing with sickly green light. And Ren felt herself fading, her consciousness growing thin and distant. Even the great Alpha King falls to proper preparation, Vivian said, her attention split between the ritual and the struggling wolf. I've been planning this for years, accounting for every variable. You were always going to lose. Fan burst into the room with his warriors, engaging the few remaining guards Vivian had held in reserve, but he could not reach the ritual circle. Dark magic formed a barrier around it, a dome of shadow that repelled anyone who tried to cross. He could only watch as his brother fought the silver chains and Ren's life drained away, helpless despite having brought an army. But Vivian had made one critical miscalculation. She had planned for a king and his warriors, for political maneuvering and physical force. She had not planned for what happened when a lunar healer, pushed to the absolute edge of death, finally stopped resisting and started fighting back. Ren had spent 3 years learning to be nothing, to suppress herself so completely that she became invisible. She had spent 2 weeks learning to access power she had not known existed, gentle healing energy that flowed outward to help others. But power was neutral, and healing magic, understood in reverse, could become something else entirely. Her mother had whispered it once, in a memory so buried Ren had forgotten until this moment. We can purify poison, child, but purification is simply transformation, and transformation can work in any direction. Ren stopped trying to hold on to her life force and instead grabbed the magical tendrils draining her, wrapped her own power around them, and pushed. Not healing energy this time, but something sharper, the same power used in reverse, transforming Vivian's dark magic at the source. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The ritual circle beneath Ren shattered, the barrier around it exploding outward in a wave of silver-white light that threw Vivian backward and disrupted every spell she had active. The silver chains holding Declan's wolf cracked, weakened, and he tore through them with renewed fury. But it was the collar around Ren's throat breaking that changed everything. 3 years of suppressed power, a lifetime of hidden bloodline, the natural abilities of a lunar healer finally unleashed without restraint, and her first shift was not gentle, but detonation. Bones reformed with audible cracks, copper-red fur emerged glowing faintly with silver-white light, and her wolf was smaller than any in the room, but radiated power that made even Finn's warrior step back instinctively. Ren's wolf shook off the broken chains and ran, not toward safety, but toward the massive black wolf still tangled in weakened silver bonds. Every instinct screamed that he was dangerous, feral, lost to madness. But the bond sang louder than instinct, and when she reached him, pressing her smaller, glowing form against his larger dark one, the world exploded into light. The mate bond, partially formed for 2 weeks, suddenly completed with a force that was visible, tangible, a golden thread connecting their souls that blazed bright enough to illuminate the entire room. Ren's healing power flooded into Declan through the bond, purifying the silver poison that had been killing him for 2 years, burning away the madness of the feral state, restoring the man beneath the beast. The shift back to human form. Orm was slower this time, controlled, and when Declan finally stood on 2 legs again, naked and scarred but whole, his amber eyes were clear and sane and fixed on the small copper wolf pressed against his side. He dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around her wolf form, and his voice was rough with emotion when he spoke. "You came for me. Even after everything, you came." Vivian was already running. Weakened by the ritual's failure, the stolen life forces she had been using for 15 years suddenly draining away, she moved toward a back exit with speed born from desperation. But Declan was faster. He caught her before she reached the door. And what followed was not an execution, but justice. His superior strength against her remaining magic, his righteous fury against her calculated cruelty. The fight was brief. Ren used her power in reverse again, not to harm, but to purify, targeting the dark magic that sustained Vivian's unnaturally extended life. The effect was immediate. Vivian aged rapidly, her smooth skin wrinkling, her blonde hair turning gray, then white, her body collapsing under the weight of years she should have already lived. She fell, not dead, but defeated, aging to her true condition, and her last words were bitter. "I was owed this, owed power, owed immortality. Your parents took it from my family with their investigations, and I was only reclaiming what was mine." "You were owed nothing," Declan said quietly, "and now you'll spend whatever life remains paying for what you stole." Jackson appeared in the doorway, the compulsion finally broken with Vivian's defeat, and he saw one of Vivian's shadow constructs, a final magical attack launched in desperation, heading toward Ren's vulnerable wolf form. He shifted faster than thought, putting his own body between the attack and its target, taking the dark magic meant for her. The construct dissolved on impact, but Jackson collapsed, his wolf form flickering as the magic tried to corrupt him. Ren shifted back to human form, ignoring her nakedness, her hands glowing as she pressed them to Jackson's fur and purified the darkness before it could take hold. When it was done, when Jackson shifted back to human and looked at her with gratitude and residual guilt, Ren spoke the words he needed to hear. "I never deserved what you did to me under compulsion. But you don't deserve to carry that guilt forever either. We were both victims. Let it end here." The facility was in ruins, 50 wolves surrounding it now, Vivian and her co-conspirators bound in silver, awaiting proper justice. Dawn broke through the shattered walls, and Declan wrapped Ren in his jacket, covering her, protecting her, his arms the safest place she had ever known. "Let's go home," he said. And Ren realized that home was not a place, but a person, and she had finally found hers. The Luna Who Healed a Kingdom. The week following Vivian's capture passed in a careful choreography of healing and justice. Royal healers confirmed what Ren already knew through the bond. Declan was completely purified. No trace of silver poison remained in his blood. His body restored to the strength it had possessed before the assassination attempt 2 years prior. Ren herself recovered more slowly, the exhaustion from her power's full awakening requiring days of rest that Declan insisted she take, bringing her meals himself and refusing to let her work until Rhiannon declared her fully restored. The trial was public, held in the Great Hall of Ironhold with representatives from every major pack in attendance. Vivian, aged and diminished but still alive, sat in silver chains as the evidence mounted against her. The journals detailing years of murder and manipulation, the testimony of wolves she had compelled, the magical signature linking her to dozens of deaths, including those of Ren's parents and Declan's. The verdict was unanimous, the sentence delivered by Declan himself with a steadiness that spoke of justice rather than revenge. Life imprisonment with magic-suppressing bonds, permanent exile from all pack bonds, forbidden from ever touching power again. Ren had to testify. standing before hundreds of wolves and speaking about parents she barely remembered, about the night she watched them die, about 13 years of believing herself worthless when in truth she carried a bloodline so valuable it had warranted systematic extinction. Her voice shook but did not break, and when she finished, the silence in the hall was profound, respectful, the kind of quiet that acknowledged pain witnessed and validated. It was Jackson who requested to speak next, his testimony careful and deliberate, as he explained the compulsion, the 3 years of awareness trapped behind magical chains, the guilt that would follow him despite Ren's forgiveness. He asked formally for transfer to a distant territory, an honorable exile, space to rebuild himself away from the constant reminder of what he had been forced to do. Before he left, he found Ren in the gardens, his expression carrying a peace that had been absent since the day he rejected her. "I don't expect you to forget," he said quietly, "but thank you for understanding the difference between victim and villain. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one ever questions your worth again, even from a distance." "I hope you find your real mate someday," Ren replied, and meant it. "Someone who chooses you freely, the way it should have been for both of us." The political resolution took longer. The council, composed of alphas from the major packs, convened to discuss the implications of an Omega Luna, their traditionalist views clashing against the undeniable evidence that Ren had saved their king and exposed corruption that had infected the highest levels of their government. The debates were fierce, arguments about rank and precedent and proper hierarchy filling hours of discussion. It was Declan who ended it, standing before the council with Ren at his side, his presence filling the room the way only an alpha king's could. "She walked through silver and dark magic to save not just me, but every wolf Vivian was slowly killing through her network of corruption. Rank is what you're born with, something determined by genetics and chance. Worth is what you prove through action and character, and Ren has proven herself 1,000 times over. Any wolf who questions her place beside me questions my judgment as king, and I invite them to challenge that judgment directly." The challenge went unanswered. Rhiannon provided the final piece, standing to address the council with the authority of her age and knowledge. Lunar healers were considered sacred in the old times, before politics corrupted our understanding of value. Ren is not just Omega, she is the last of a bloodline more rare than any alpha, capable of magic we believed extinct. By blood alone, she outranks most wolves in this room. The vote that followed was unanimous, though Ren suspected some votes came from political calculation rather than genuine acceptance. She did not care. Acceptance born from fear of the king's displeasure was still acceptance, and she had learned to take victories where she found them. The Luna coronation was combined with the mating ceremony, held under a full moon in the ancient ritual grounds that had witnessed such ceremonies for centuries. Hundreds of wolves attended, filling the clearing and the forest beyond, their eyes glowing in the darkness as they watched Ren, dressed in traditional silver that caught moonlight and made her copper hair seem to burn, approach Declan at the center of the ceremonial circle. The formal vows were prescribed by tradition, but Declan added his own words, his voice carrying to every witness. "I vow to cherish your strength, honor your scars, and spend eternity proving you made the right choice in saving a dying king. You are my mate, my Luna, my equal in all things, and I will never allow you to forget your worth again." Ren's response? Ons came from her heart rather than tradition. "I vow to stand beside you, not behind you, to heal not just your wounds, but our kingdom, and to never again make myself small for someone else's comfort. You didn't save me, Declan. You gave me reason to save myself, and that's worth more than rescue ever could be." The bond flared between them as they completed the ceremony, visible to every wolf present, a golden thread that pulsed with power and promise. When Declan kissed her, the forest erupted in howls of celebration, the sound carrying for miles through territories that would learn to accept what they could not change. After the ceremony, after the political necessities had been satisfied and the witnesses had departed, Declan took Ren to the waterfall where they had almost kissed weeks ago. The moon painted everything silver, and for the first time since her rejection 3 years prior, Ren felt completely at peace. "I was taught to fear the mate bond," Declan said as they sat on smooth rocks near the water's edge, his hand warm in hers. "They said it made my father weak when my mother died, that his descent into madness proved love was a liability for kings. But they were wrong. It wasn't the bond that destroyed him. It was losing her without having truly lived with her first. He spent so much time protecting her that he forgot to simply be with her. I won't make that mistake." "I thought rejection broke me," Ren confessed, her voice quiet but steady. "Spent 3 years believing I was shattered beyond repair. But it only broke the cage others had built around me. You didn't save me from that cage, Declan. You gave me a reason to break out of it myself, and that made all the difference." They shifted together, running through the royal forest as wolves, her copper-red form glowing faintly with healing light, his massive black form with silver streaks moving beside her with protective grace rather than possessive control. They ran until dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, two souls no longer fighting their bond, but celebrating it, no longer merely surviving, but fully, finally living. The months that followed established a new pattern. Ren took on the role not of traditional Luna, but of Luna healer, traveling to packs throughout the territories to purify remnants of dark magic and teach healing arts to wolves who had forgotten such knowledge existed. Declan ruled beside her, reforming corrupt systems and establishing safeguards against the kind of manipulation Vivian had practiced for years. They led as partners, equals who challenged each other and strengthened each other in the challenging. Ren returned to Crescent, fall 6 months after becoming Luna, walking into the pack house that had been her prison with her head high and power radiating from her in waves no one could ignore. Alpha Garrett, stripped of his authority after his connection to Vivian's network was exposed, could only watch as she freed the Omegas he had kept as servants and established a sanctuary program for wolves escaping abusive pack situations. She visited her old attic room one final time, standing in the space that had felt like the entire world when she was trapped within it. The cage that had held her was so small. The window overlooking forest she was now free to run through whenever she wished. The door that had locked from the outside now hanging open on broken hinges. She left both window and door open when she departed, a symbol for the next wolf who needed to remember they could leave. The final scene came a year after the mating ceremony. Ren stood on the balcony of Ironhold Castle at sunset, Declan's arms wrapped around her from behind, his hand resting gently on the small swell of her stomach where new life grew. They had not announced the pregnancy yet, were savoring the private knowledge before it became public celebration, but Finn had guessed from the way Declan hovered even more protectively than usual. "What do we teach them?" Ren asked, her hand covering Declan's on her stomach. "That rank doesn't define worth? That healing is as powerful as strength?" "We teach them that their mother was once told she was nothing, and she became everything," Declan replied, his voice warm against her ear. "And their father was once so afraid of love he chose death, until love chose him back and gave him reason to fight. We teach them that scars are proof of survival, that cages can be broken, and that sometimes the most powerful magic isn't in bloodlines or bonds, but in the choice to try again." The sun set over the kingdom they would shepherd together, painting the sky in colors that promised tomorrow would come regardless of what today had held. They were no longer a dying king and broken Omega, no longer defined by what had been done to them, but by what they had chosen to become. Partners who had found in each other proof that survival could transform into living, that wounds could become wisdom, and that sometimes the most important thing was not being saved, but learning you were worth saving in the first place. The scars remained, visible and invisible, written on skin and memory alike, but scars were simply proof of what they had survived, and they had survived everything thrown at them. Together, they would more than survive what came next. They would thrive.